What's up, everybody? It's Malcolm, and I am back once again with another episode of Retrospective, where we take past national champions and or world champions and try to take a bit of a deep dive back into their past decks in Universus history and just kind of get their perspective of it, what was going on at the time, what was the meta. And then, as a special treat, we'll have, how can it be played in the current retro format today? So, my guest, first episode, was Tim Keefe, and my guest for this second episode is our 2022 North American champ, Barrett Bryant. Barrett, how are you doing, buddy?
I'm doing pretty good, man. I'm glad to be here, and I'm excited because this was not too long ago. So I luckily have pretty good memory of it still.
All right, as wild as it was, as mind you, this is 2022, right, guys? In order for me to find this deck list, I had to go on Universus Facebook page, and I scrolled back through 2 years of photos to find out where they did the top 16 deck lists from Nats this year, and I got the photo from that, and that's how I recreated this deck list.
I was wondering where you got it because when UVS Ultra became UVS Ultra, because it used to be UFS Ultra, but
Yeah.
when it changed, a lot of those tournament decks in the categories you can find, they disappeared, and this was in that same category of year because there are 2022 decks in UVS Ultra, but not mine apparently.
Yeah, no, that was my first thing. I said, oh, 2022. I was just like, I don't have to do a deep dive. Like with Tim, it happened to be that Tam, back when he was with TCG University, they did an immediate like deck profile after the event, and like that's the only way that I had it. Another one was Phil Birch's Jiffany Jamber. Somebody else had did a deck profile for that one. And I think there was like one more, and I think that's like pretty much it. Like documenting history for this game has been rough, or even the HLC from this year. I had to go to the video recap on the universe, not the universes, the My Hero YouTube channel. Click on that link. Of course, take that link, put it in a Wayback Machine in order to access the link, and then take the deck list from there.
Damn.
So I have done a lot of hoops, but it's fine. Like I said, I'm just trying to get with it. Mark Tyner, as we've been back and forth, he's trying to figure out how to get his deck list from his guild. And then was it Cassandra he ran for teams? I don't know, I can't remember. But yeah, trying to find like those older decks is like it's been tough. But the ones that I can, I've been happy to be able to reach out. And I normally don't reach out until I'm actually able to get everything. So I'm just like, oh God, this was 2 years ago. I don't know how fresh it's going to be in whoever's mind. So I might maybe shoot them the deck list, allow them to get like a refresher. So you played Tokoyami. For those who are uninitiated, Tokoyami has rotated out. He's a part of the base set of My Hero. He is a 7 hand size, 20 health character that says enhance once per turn. Discard the top 5 cards of your deck. Add 1 copy of Summon Dark Shadow from your discard pile to your hand. Then his second enhance is this attack gets +1 or -1 damage. Only playable while committed. Now Barrett, was this a meta call character for you for Nats, or is this like a Barrett Bryant character?
It's for sure a meta call. I don't know how much you remember of 2022, but essentially this was the age of Kirishima 2 and aggressive 6 hand size. Hey, sounds familiar, right?
Yeah.
It seems to be a lot of the times in our game that the deck that is like the most gravitated towards it are these 6 hand size aggro characters, and essentially in my opinion and based through testing, a lot of the decks that beat the 6 hand size aggro characters are usually the 7 hand size aggro characters. A little bit more card advantage. Although you have less health total, you have more cards to defend with, so you have a little bit more defense, and usually you have more offense because your opponent doesn't have as much to survive against your aggressiveness. That being said, I'm an Eraserhead player
Mm-hmm.
through and through, so another character that's rotated, of course, and we won't go too far into it, but I am very much at my core a defensive player, but historically every event that I've ever won, it is because of exactly what you just said. I decided a little bit time out that it's just not the time to play something like a control deck. It's not the time to have 60-minute rounds. It is time to show up and try and kill people, essentially. Just get through the rounds and take advantage of what people are not ready for. And it's not that I think this character was a wild card per se in the meta. It was just I think what I chose to do with the character is a little different than what most Tokoyami decks. I mean, you just said you had Tim Keefe on not too long ago, and he won the only regional where this character won a regional during its lifetime in the format.
Yeah,
So
because especially I think the closest was Kobe Cram on Fire. That was the one
yeah,
Broberg won with Death Eraserhead. That RLE, and that was like the closest after that. Because I think ninth or 10th was the highest he placed at the HLC before rotation. So,
I want to say even Tim Keefe's was probably also on fire when he won his regional. That was like a Las Vegas regional.
mm-hmm.
And so since then, the character hadn't really seen any more love. Like the character hadn't been played basically all of during 2022. Because we had new stuff. We had set 3 that was coming out. Set 2 was out, obviously. But since the character came out in the end of 2021, right, as we went into the first ever competitive year of 2022, he'd only won one regional. He made top cut appearance, but he wasn't, Jiro 1, right? He wasn't an Eraserhead. He
Yeah,
wasn't a Asui, right?
yeah,
So it was just this different world where this is set 3, of course, by the time I played this character, and I just thought it was the correct call because the Chaos symbol at this time in set 3 still had incredible offense using cards from Dinky One's kit, using cards from Tokoyami's own kit, and also Todoroki's kit. But then you still also have a plethora of defensive cards that are just in your foundations, which is exactly what the 6 hand size offensive decks were kind of doing. But I have more cards than my opponent because, like, let's be real. Although he's a 7-hander, just because of that first ability that you talked about, he's not a 7-hander. He's actually an 8-hander cross turn.
yeah. I
If you don't turn your character sideways because of the effect of Summon Dark Shadow, he's actually a 9-hander.
like another 7-hander we know of. Maybe Eraserhead sometimes when he commits.
Yeah, exactly. So it's kind of a mix of I took my play style that I had for Eraserhead, which was play a 7-hander who plays good enough defense. I have minus damage on phase. I get enough cards in my hand, and then just actually make a deck that can kill people.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. Like I said, I started Gen Con 2022 is when I did the oh god, what did they call it then? The beginners exam or something like that. I don't remember what it was. It was just where you took the Deku or the Bakugo, the Midori one of the Bakugo one demo decks, and then we played like a 3-round tournament. So this Nats online Nats, because I'd only got to the game a couple months before then. That was my first event I played in because I didn't know about the webcam weeklies. I didn't know, so you could imagine, like, fresh faced off of Gen Con. I had no locals, and the first event I played in was this on the online Nats, and I played Eraserhead because that was my favorite character. So I got baptized early into this game because I had no clue about Ojiro 2 at the time. And I played Ojiro 2 pre-errata Ojiro 2 round 1 because it was not errata at this time. And then got introduced to Momo and Eraserhead mirrors and all of that. So I would tell you, I felt like I learned this game in a Shark Tank, and Tokoyami was definitely the first character that I ever got turned to on.
Yeah.
And I just couldn't help but watch and say, like, wow. Like, now when I think about when I seen, Sam Tate, we talk about orange card, blue card, like, that's Tokoyami.
I think that's actually where it came from,
Yeah.
to be honest. I think it was just in the heat of the Sam Tate is also a known Tokoyami hater, I would say, of like dying to Tokoyami on turn 2 because of exactly what you just said. Orange card, blue card, orange card, blue card. So yeah, I mean it's so funny because like you had Tim Keefe already on here, but it's funny because I won this event, and in final I had to be against Tim Keefe. So very thematic that you chose me next.
On Jiro of all characters as well,
Yes.
too. I just wish I could have got a Jiro on for maybe a Nats or a Royals win. But we've had pre-course here. Other thing I will say, this second enhance from Tokoyami, that -1 damage, can't tell you how many kill turns I thought I had.
Yeah.
Until I realized -1, -1, -1 adds up over a turn. Let's do
Yeah.
this by difficulty. Then we'll go
Yeah,
from
for
there.
sure.
One of my favorite cards, probably the card that I missed the most since rotation, Ice Storm. What was Ice Storm doing? Which was surprising. Most Tokoyamis I've seen is they were running like a 3 or 4. You decided 2 copies of this card. What was the reason behind that one?
So this this is where I have to I have to own up to it a little bit. This deck to me is not perfect. I do think again I was playing Razorhead for most of the format, and it wasn't until this took place in October was this championship. I want to say I made the decision to play Tokoyami at Nationals probably in August, so I had about 2 months to work on the deck, and Ice Storm is an incredible card, right? It has Breaker 2, it's a mid block, which means you can block anything with it. It's a powerful 3/4 diff, 4 over 4. It has Deadlock on it, which is not the best Deadlock ability in the game, but it is a relevant one. And the first main ability is that it can't be blocked by attack cards.
Yeah.
And if you played our game at all, and even in a little capacity, if I've gone first, and I've built my first turn, your opponent goes, they build for their first turn, and I go back to my turn, most of the cards that are stuck in your opponent's hand are going to be attack cards that they weren't physically able to play on their first turn of the game. So this is just one of the best turn 2 attacks in the game by far, especially for what it existed for, because it essentially becomes an unblockable move that you can play at any point during the string because it's a 4 diff. You can end with it because it's a 4 diff. You can lead with it if you have ways of generating momentum. It has powerful already. Or by the time you get to the end of your string, if you can't pass it or you can't do anything with it, you hold on to it because it's got a 2 breaker block on it.
Yes. Probably the most versatile card in the format at that time, I thought. It felt great. Like again, we talked about, it felt great at any point in the string. It felt great in your hand. It was just, I don't know. And it also had powerful 3 to boot. Sometimes it was just a great finisher with the momentum out.
Yep.
I don't know. Great card. The most polarizing attack, I would think, in our current card pool, Twisting Azure. I will say that this card was against Tokoyami is when I was on the bandwagon, pun intended, of getting this card banned. But outside of Tokoyami, this card just feels like really mid if you can't get the damage there, get some actions to like really beef it up. Obviously in Tokoyami, this was primarily played more as like a flow card, and it looks like that's what you kind of have it here as a 2 of as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there just wasn't strong enough actions in the game yet for this to be like a full build around, and I think even in the character that gets to pick up an action, the good news is that the Summon Dark Shadow in conjunction with your character card means that it's going to get +4 damage, which means if your opponent only has... So in the mirror match, this card's great, right? Your opponent only has -1 damage on face. The problem is, if your opponent presses a single -2 damage button, this card's dead. Like, it just didn't do what you wanted it to do, while also being a mid-attack. The biggest reason it's still in the deck is there are some points later on in the game that if you have enough Summon Dark Shadows, it actually becomes a kill card, right? Where you're allowed to put a bunch of them on there. But essentially the only purpose of the card in my deck was to become a speed card. I just wanted a little bit of extra speed, and you'll see that there's like a theme of like wanting to kind of focus on a lot of speed things in this deck, because as we know of what Tokoyami was really, really good at is if he finds cards like Dark Shadow Ruin, I'm playing cards like Indiscriminate Shock, and with Tokoyami alone on his face, you're never short of damage. This character can dish out 40, 50 plus damage on the turn that you want to go in and kill somebody, but they're pretty blockable. Like, they are pretty blockable.
Yeah.
So this was just an example to make that a little harder.
Yeah, and the chain blocking, I would say that was the only real success that I had against Tokoyami during that time as well, too. Plus, at this time in the card pool, guys, there was not a lot of damage reduction within a card pool. Nowhere near as much as, of course, that we have now. So it was just like almost if Tokoyami's seen a Twisting and had like a Summon Dark Shadow to play or one that was in the card pool, it was just rough to get to, especially with Stronger Darkness, which we'll talk about once we hit the foundations. Frozen Slash, probably one of the better cards in the range package from Heroes Clash. That was, again, just like another flow card. You also kind of see this theme with Tokoyami that he has a lot of cards that can double his flow, and then also can just be like a really solid poke as well too. But this one was just if this attack has received the speed and damage bonus, which usually could happen with Summon Dark Shadow, your next range attack comes in with +2/+2. I don't think I have ever used the Deadlock on this card. Have you, Barrett?
I used it once
Okay.
at Nationals that I won. I used it once. I went to Deadlock against the Kirishima 2, and did it end up winning the game? No. But it was funny because I pressed the button, but I only had like one other ranged attack in the card pool, so it just said my opponent lost 2. But I mean, 2 damage is 2 damage, so I mean it's not relevant. But I'll be honest with you, this card is the worst card in the deck. We talked about Ice Storm, and as you look at my sideboard, just really quick, I'm playing 2 Ice Storms. The 2 Ice Storms came in, and they took the Frozen Slashes every game 2 and game 3. I want you to know that Frozen Slash was cut from the deck every time after game 2. And it had nothing to do with the card itself. I think the card is fine, but it is that same category of Twisting Azure Inferno, which is like, it needs help to get going.
Yeah.
And luckily, because of the foundations and also the character, like, foundations can give you the speed. That was kind of what I was looking to do. And then the character itself gives it a damage bonus. So giving the next thing 2/2 was never the issue. It's just that this was always the weakest attack I played because it itself didn't get very big.
Yeah, this was definitely my favorite showdown target when I was playing against the Tokoyami.
Yeah. And so, yeah, luckily that card didn't exist when I was playing, but yeah, I agree with you in the sense of just like it just felt the weakest. And when you're in a deck like this that's playing 22 attacks, and this is back when you didn't have to play 60 card decks, so this was like 59 cards or something like that. When you have 22 attacks in your 59 card deck, when you have the weakest ones, you feel how weak they are. Mm-hmm. Because if that's the one you draw on your kill turn, you're like, I wish this was anything else. And so games 2 and 3, it didn't exist in the deck. And when I played Tokoyami again at the HLC that year, this card was nowhere to be found. Right. So
I could certainly believe it is so. Probably the as far as for power impact level, this is probably the risky encounter of our time, which is the rare indiscriminate shock. I think this is the most, before risky encounter happened, this was the most expensive rare I ever shelled out for. And at the time, I think it was like $6, and I was just like, man, this is an expensive rare. Then now, if you just look at the prices of a risky encounter, like, this was a steal, but probably one of the best kill cards of any era, really. Indiscriminate shot, 1.3 million volts. This attack gets +1 damage for each committed rival foundation. No damage cap. If guys are wondering, why some of these newer cards they seem to have a damage cap, this is the reason for the safety briefing. And then it also had an enhance for a committed foundation. Your rival commits 1. Now known as Master Drunken Fighting as well too, and it has Stun 1 on itself. Just, man, what a great card.
Yeah, this was essentially one of the kill cards, and as I stated before, a lot of the sub-theme of the deck was giving speed to my move, but without there being a lot of speed cards on Chaos, the best way that we did that was that we committed our opponent's board. So even as we go further down into the deck list, like, there's a theme of, I do have heavy stun, but not enough to make this card, like, okay, you can't play it first or second, right? You have to play it third or fourth. And luckily, because of cards like Summon Dark Shadow, you are able to play this 5-diff later on in the chain. But it requires a little bit of help. There's even a great stream game from that I played against my good friend Jacob Johnson, who is also a former champion that you might have on here one day. That he was playing a Momo list, a Momo 1 back in the time, and I, on stream, killed him because I went indiscriminate shot. And it's essentially just enough to end somebody's life total, right? So, very good kill card. It's actually one of the biggest reasons why I chose to play Chaos versus the Fire Symbol that most Tokoyami decks were playing, because you had a real kill card like this, because almost every other attack we'll go through also has the fire symbol, but this one doesn't. And so this was one of the big reasons that you got to play this symbol.
Yeah, I feel like the Best Genius put me in the mind of Dinky 1, not in abilities or anything, but as far as a character who everybody on his symbols plays his kits, but nobody plays the character.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's just what Indiscriminate Shock was, Electric Jolt was. If you had it on that symbol, unless you were running a specific package, you just played those cards. And even if you did run a specific package, those were the cards that you ran that weren't a part of it. that just made that much of an impact that you just ran it anyway. And like I said, I just feel the same way with Best Genius as well too. I see Always Cool in nearly everything, and it's just like you hardly see Best Geniuses around. All right, here we are. The first 4X in the deck for obvious reasons here. Dark Shadow Ruin, Tokoyami's Ultra Rare. I will let you go off with this one here.
Yeah, I mean, this is actually just like, even since set 1 when Tokoyami came out, like, this is the kill card. Basically because just of that bottom enhance, which is if it's received a speed and damage bonus, which we talked about earlier with Frozen Slash, it gets 3 damage and it gains stun 1. So, if you play the Summon Dark Shadow, it's a 5 high for 6, just kidding. It's a 5 high for 9, but your character's committed now, just kidding. It's a 5 high for 10 by itself. By itself, it has a 5 high for 10 with stun 1 on it. Oh, and hey, it has another ability. Actions in your card pool do not count towards progressive difficulty for the rest of the turn, which is the whole idea of Tokoyami, right? We talk about orange card, blue card, but if all the blue cards don't count towards progressive difficulty, and by the way, also our blue card gives plus to our checks, this card is the bread and butter. This is how the deck flows. This is how that work and synergy works for it. And it can be played, again, at any point in the string. I love to play this card second, because if you play the first move, play the Summon Dark Shadow, committed your character, you got to play the Summon Dark Shadow Ruin with +3 to your check. It immediately comes in with 1/1, which means you can start with the second enhance. And then also, then you press the first enhance, and you've now made that action card that you've already played in your card pool not count towards progressive for the rest of the turn, only having these 2 attack cards, essentially. So it just always got to free up your card pool. Like, you had so many cards in your card pool, but you never knew which ones counted and which ones didn't, especially as we get to the other 5 diff that's in this deck, as a 4 of. They just flow together so well. That was why this deck was a menace. And this was just the one that killed people, because it got to upwards of like 11 to 13 damage every time you played one.
Yeah, and it was just like playing a normal attack string. Like, it wasn't like a super setup in order to get it that big. It was just, I'm just going to play these cards as I should. But Dark Shadow Ruin, like, man, it's just one of those. It pumps stats. It helps you ignore progressive. It was just, and probably, I will say, probably the best regional promo art of all the attacks.
True.
I
didn't even own those.
Yeah, I own them, and I do miss them, and like I look forward towards retro so I can like bust those out again, or like MHA only spotlight, so that way we can kind of get that going there. But yeah, no, Dark Shadow Ruin is the crux of the attack lineup, the crux of the deck. Once Tokoyami finds at least like 1 or 2 of these, I want to say, and then maybe a few other attacks. I want to say maybe it don't even matter what the other attacks are. You got like 2 Dark Shadow Ruins. It might just be a kill turn depending on what the other attacks are.
Yeah, usually 26 damage alone just from those 2.
Yeah, the used to be super expensive Frigid Heat Waves. These things are like dirt cheap now. I laugh at how cheap they are. I love this card though. On all 3 of the symbols, I always played it. This is kind of what made you want to play a range package. Frigid Heatwave, 5/3, 5/4. If you have 6 or more ranged attacks in your discard pile, you just get to draw 2 cards. And then bottom enhance, discard the top 3 cards of your deck. This attack gets +2 damage for each ranged attack discarded this way. This card also accidentally kind of just got big numbers. And with a base 5 speed, you had to respect it.
Yeah, I mean, that's honestly the biggest reason why I fell in love with it, was that this was like the best attack to lead with always, because you got to figure out where your turn went. You're a character that mills 5 on face. This card mills 3 alone. Again, like I said, we're playing a 22 attack deck with 59 cards, which is way higher percentage than most other decks nowadays. Mm-hmm. So like, and every attack has range. So the idea is like, if I hit 6 of them, you're gonna get there. And so yeah, you can pull up the graph and look at that percentage, but it's like, after your build turn,
37%.
yeah. So after your build turn, and you start doing attacks, especially if you went second. If you went second and your opponent attacked you on their turn 2, you got to mill 5 as Tokoyami, and you didn't care if you hit a Summon Dark Shadow or not. You just milled 5 more for this Frigid Heatwave to become a little bit more alive, so that instead of being that quote-unquote 9-hander cross turn that I told you about, you're actually an 11-hander. and it just goes and goes as the more of these that you find. It was only a 3 of because there were times going first on turn 2, you don't have the 6, you just sometimes don't get them, and then it just becomes a very weird, fast stat stick, which is not a bad thing, but it's the only reason why it wasn't a 4 of. But yeah, this was the reason to play the range package, which is why I did.
Yeah, yeah, and it's for the reason why it was expensive. It was, I mean, it was a pretty good ultra rare. Don't get me wrong, but it's also one of the few short printed ultra rares that was out there.
Yeah,
So
that's true.
yeah, this one of my favorite cards that I missed desperately because Cinder Convection could never. Giant Ice Wall, 5/3, a 3 low for 5 with Breaker 1 and Stun 2 that had a beautiful enhance of discard momentum. Your next range attack gains Stun 2. Uh, value, value, value.
Yeah, I mean, I call this card. This is the best turn 3 card. But at the end of the day, if your opponent had a bad build turn, which the only good like building symbols in the game at the time were ones that had new training method symbols, and don't get me wrong, Earth was everywhere because of things like Kirishima 2. But like a lot, even new training method, those cards that they built came in committed, and having this card as a lead-in with stun 2 to then go into a Dark Shadow Ruin who is going to get an extra stun 1 after committing 3 of your opponent's cards, any indiscriminate shock that you wanted to play afterwards, or if you gave enough speed from the other cards that exist in the deck in the Foundations base, everything was unblockable, which is why this card was like had a higher priority. Just like you said, it has an off-zone breaker block. I can't tell you how many times that matters because it just does. And then yeah, if you played it on turn 3, another reason to play the range package, it was a stun 4 card. Like across 2 things, it was stun 4, right?
Yes.
Which is just crazy good.
Yeah, yeah, no, like I said, I missed this card desperately. I think after set 1 rotated, I just didn't think about the water symbol anymore. Primarily just because like Giant Ice Wall was gone, Frigid Heat Wave was gone, then Tongue Whip was gone. It was just like I don't want to play the water symbol anymore.
Yeah.
Um,
Blame
the,
you.
the last attack, my attack that I actually, if there was ever a time I was sad after a ban, I understand why, but I loved Corona Frog Takedown so much.
Yeah, this is the biggest difference from this deck right here versus what I had to play at the HLC because, spoiler alert, after I won this Nationals,
Yep.
Tokoyami then proceeded to win other Nationals right after. The webcam regional was won by Tokoyami. That was essentially my list. And then I think there was another international North America or national that was won by Tokoyami. Don't know if that was my list or not. But essentially, 2022 national season was the year of the bird, and this card got banned afterwards.
Yeah.
So my deck had to change, but if we read it real quick, the idea is it's a 5 difficulty 4 high for 5 range, like we said, enhance. Just by itself, this card doesn't count towards progressive for the rest of the turn. So as long as you played the card, it didn't matter for the rest of the turn. And then there's another benefit, because it's got their faces on it. If you're playing Tokoyami or Asui on it, you can ready a card in your stage that hasn't been readied this combat phase. And the key part about this card is that it says, ready a card in your stage.
Yeah.
Which means you can ready Tokoyami after you've used a Summon Dark Shadow to have him ready on your opponent's turn so that you can mill 5 and pick up one of the Summon Dark Shadows that you just used.
Yes.
That alone was crazy.
Yeah.
But more often than not, when you were killing somebody, you don't need your character to be ready on the next turn. It just readied a foundation, which was so good.
Yeah, and then the other thing with it too was it was also it was a high. So between Chrome Frog Takedown, you had a high that ignored progressive. Frigid Heat Wave was a high. Dark Shadow Ruin was a high. Sometimes you just got zone taxed, and there was nothing you could do about it. You could have whatever cards you wanted to, but eventually, once my general rule of thumb was like once I let Tokoyami get 2 through, then the game's probably over.
That was the biggest thing. I think why Chrome Frog got banned was that if you saw these hit the board, you just had to eat them. You were like, man, this is just a flow piece for them. It's not actually killing me like a Dark Shadow Ruin, or like you said, the Frigid Heatwave sometimes got a bunch of damage. I have to just save my high block for the Dark Shadow Ruins, which was always like the way that you played against Tokoyami. So if they drew 2 or 3 of these on the turn they were killing you, you were just eating 20 damage to the face. Because they're not for 5, right? Like you're giving them more damage from Summon Dark Shadows, Stronger in Darknesses. You just have to eat them, and you just got to sit there, and it never felt good. And so I know why the card got banned, But essentially, this was a 3 diff, even though the top left number said a 5.
Yeah. Yeah, I like I said, I missed it because when I tell you that I ran, it didn't have to be a range package. In fact, it was the infinity symbol. I want to say I almost ran this card in every deck I played.
Yeah, because it just said you don't have to be Tokoyami or Asui for it to not count.
Yeah. Before we go into foundations, normally I like to go to foundations and then action and assets, but this is a very important action to the deck. It's Summon Dark Shadow, 2/5 ally action with a static of while this card is in your card pool, your attacks get +1/+1. And then you have the enhance your next check to play a card. This turn gets +3, commit your character.
Yeah, I mean, like we said, orange card, blue card. Like this was the card that you put in there because it had that card pool effect of the 1/1. It was if you had more than one of these in a turn, your opponent was probably dead because it meant you were putting 2 speed on everything, not just the 2 damage. But it also meant you were passing your checks no matter what, right? And my favorite part about this card is it didn't commit your character as cost.
Yeah.
So you got to play in this weird scenario where like people were playing action hate back in the day. It was a card called concentrate or other stuff like that. Like you could cancel the effect, but if you cancel the effect, you got to keep your character ready, which means even if you don't have +3 to your check, when you go to play the next attack, you just tap Tokoyami to pass the check. Like you just like it felt like it was like an uncounterable action.
Yeah, it was. As I said, Summon Dark Shadow is the reason why City Rampage is the way that it is today.
Yeah, that's pretty fair.
Yeah, right. But yeah, man, this card again. People wanted this card banned or errated again just because of Tokoyami. But it was just one of these weird cards where it was a lot like specialized sound waves. It felt broken or band ready in Juro, but outside of them, it was just a 40-cent card. I mean, specialized sound waves is like a 40-cent ultra rare, but it's because you really didn't have anybody else that could take advantage of it. So it was always. I know Discord. If there was ever like a heated discussion in main court about Tokoyami, Summon Dark Shadow was usually always the one up there. I mean, it's twisting, but man, people really wanted this to like say ally only or the arranged attacks or something along the lines of that. But it didn't get hit. Like I said, it just rotated out. It was what it was, and that was that. But speaking of getting hit, this also was a benefactor. The Year of the Bird, Stronger in Darkness. It was a 0 diff that just says that if your character was committed, +1 damage.
Yeah, I don't think the stats on this card are crazy broken, right? Like, it's got a 3 high block, but, like, the block didn't matter because if you saw these, you built them, like, every time. Because, yeah, essentially, if your character's committed, this gets 1 damage. It's repeatable damage pump, which in the history of our game, as long as I've been playing it, repeatable damage pump on cards that are not a heavy deck building cost, aka it's a 0 difficulty, they're just always very oppressive and very, very good for the characters that are able to use and abuse them, right? So, Tokoyami, your character is going to always be committed if you use a Summon Dark Shadow. It is essentially just extra damage on top of it. Your character now says +2 damage if you have one of these, and it just keeps scaling, and it never feels good because it just didn't have a cost for your opponent's deck building choices, right? Because this being a 0 diff means you could actually just build 4 of these on turn 1 if you found them all.
Yeah, and that was again, that's not like now. If you guys look at the card pool, you'll see most of the 0 diffs that are pumping, they are usually like a flip cost or something along the lines of that. Again, This is the reason why that is probably that way. Yeah, it's just a super strong card. It's something else I want to bring out here fairly quickly as well too. It's now nearly unheard of, but you are playing like what 4, 8, 12, 14 0 diffs.
This was the reason to play Chaos. We were going to have to talk about it at one point, but this was the other reason why I played Chaos, because you'll notice not all of these 0 diffs, and you ready? You talked about it already earlier. There were more that I could have played.
Yeah.
Because requesting assistance is not in this deck. And that card is very good, right? And if you were playing those symbols, you played that card pretty much. But I didn't because the goal was we were killing people on turn 2.
Yeah.
So we didn't have any momentum. But Release is in here as a defensive 0 diff. The rest of them are all aggressive stat cards, like Easily Excited and Basic Training. Basic Training is just the deadlock version of Stronger in Darkness.
Yep.
kind of, right? But like the idea was I was building 5 foundations on my first turn, no matter what. And more often than not, I was building 6, sometimes 7, because of how many zero diffs you were able to play, and they weren't bad. Like they weren't bad.
Yeah, and that's like that's been my issue. Like zero diffs. Like I like for my, of course, is more important thing. I need my um, foundations to have like stage impact, like immediate impact in the stage, board impact, and primarily that's like a lot of two diffs. I mean, you have to play your spam just to get it there, but like it's like what 21 spam I think here. So
Yeah,
like,
something
again,
crazy.
that just creates such a super consistent turn one build, and potentially stupid dumb turn two build, especially if you're like if first player didn't build well. I know there was one time I had a build two pass against Tokoyami and they just built seven.
Yeah.
All right, six or seven. I can't remember what it was, but it was just like they went more to normal because if anything, they would be willing. There was no way I was dealing 20 damage off of two foundations, not at that time anyway.
It was just crazy high rolls where it was like if I went second, just like what you're talking about, you got to draw the extra card, you got to do the partial Paris mulligan, and if you built 6 on your opponent and kept your character ready, you had 2 cards in your hand, and you got to pick up a Summon Dark Shadow when they attacked you. Like it was actually miserable for your opponent to play against this because I could actually pass 2 or 3 blocks, and I had 3 cards. Oh, and by the way, eventually my character will get committed and I will just start getting minus damage as well. It was so oppressive going second, but the deck obviously wanted to go first. And at the end of the day, because of cards like Summon Dark Shadow and Dark Shadow Ruin and Crone Frog, I didn't need 6 foundations to kill you.
Yeah,
I probably could just do it on 3. I'm sure I did it on 3 a couple of times, but like if the wider you built, the more defensive you were, and you also just had the backswing potential.
I was gonna say yeah, that was definitely during this era. It was more important just to kind of have the foundations up just for the seven handers to survive. I want to say now they kind of have a bit more abilities. They can kind of you can get away without, like I said, running like 14 zero diffs. Um,
Yeah.
and then you can probably get away like maybe 8 or 10, give or take, and then still have other stuff to go there. But yeah, this was like a standard thing. I don't think I ever seen a Tokoyami running like less than 12 zero diffs under
That's
the
about
chaos
right.
symbol.
And there was a version too where like I think I played like 4 releases because I wanted to go into the more defensive thing. But again, at the end of the day, when I made the meta call, like, no, we need to kill people. I'm still gonna play the defensive one. There's another one on the sideboard. But like at the end of the day, it was like let's pay 12 copies of all the offensive stat giving zero diffs, right?
Right, yeah, and that's something that I had went to my most recent LC. I had travel go play with some of my buddies, and we had a new player that he's been getting along with down there. And yeah, that's the one thing he said. He's just like, man, he loved playing Reiner, but he's just like, I just hate the time rules for playing like with a control deck. And I just like, yeah, and I see why everybody kind of like brings aggro to a tournament.
Yeah.
That's because I don't have to leave it up to a time or a draw.
I had the longest lunch break out of anybody in this tournament because I think the round right before lunch, I finished my round in actually less than 10 minutes. So then I had an hour and 50 minutes to go walk to the Chick-fil-A or something. It was some chicken place down the street, which was quite a bit of a walk. Ordered my food, sat down and ate it, came back, and people weren't done with lunch yet. It was crazy. It was
But
so cool.
yeah, that was a story for a lot of Tokoyami. Even on the online Nats, it's the same deal too. Anytime I had to play against like a Tokoyami or Draw 2, I was just like, well, I got plenty of time this round. Get up, stretch my legs.
Yep.
On to the one disc. Struggling with studies, which at this time was not a 3 or 4x in the current meta. This was always just kind of a tech piece. What was it doing here in this deck for you?
Yeah, I mean, I did value blocking a lot. It was also like this really cool scenario where like if you played just cheeky enough defense, this allowed you to like rebuy the breaker blocks on Ice Storm and Giant Ice Wall. If you use Summon Dark Shadow defensively, like actually giving +3 to your check to block kind of thing, as long as your opponent played the third move, you could like get them back in your hand if you already had an extra one in your discard pile. And honestly, at the end of the day, the response was still relevant back in the day because this was
Yeah.
also seizing the advantage meta. So all the Kirishima 2s were playing cards like seizing the, I think it's what it's called, right? Seizing
Yeah,
the
season
advantage.
advantage, yep.
which was selective flip on your board, and just like what you said, right? Like, I'm not playing a lot of the higher difficulty foundations, but the ones that I am playing are good abilities, and so I wanted to protect them. And so, just like as with my other one diffs, I have Chivalrous Competitor also on here, which is another one of those cards that just protects your board. If this one is also Destruction, which funny enough did work because I got to play that ability against an Ochaku 2 that was playing. What's that one card? It's the six diff, the Nomu one. You gotta help me out.
Gale Force Punch.
Yes, Gale Force Punch, which says if your opponent has more foundations than you, you get to selectively destroy one of them. And I always had more foundations than the five-hander. So Chivalrous said, no, I'm just going to flip this instead. So again, there was a little bit of board interaction in the game. Obviously, like I mainly used it for the defensive enhance, which is why it's just a 2 of, because sometimes we just never got there. And then Chivalrous was mainly there to draw. But that's what the kind of reason why these two were here in the deck. I had a third struggling in the sideboard, and honestly, it kind of came in quite a bit. Like, it sometimes took the place of one of the zero diffs, because at the end of the day, like, I didn't always need all these zero diffs, and a one diff versus a zero diff is really not that big of a deal on turn one. And then Feeling Cute is the foundation popper that just gives speed. Again, we needed to give speed to our moves because we didn't ever have... We always had enough damage. You just got to give some extra speed. And it just gave you full value when you did eventually have to commit foundations. You got to blow them up for extra stuff.
Yeah, man, you got to clean up your stage. I always like try to run at least like 2 copies of a Destroyer cost for stats. Just because once my stuff gets flipped, or I'm like, okay, we're in a situation now where I just need that to build with. And I'm ready to like get it out there. Like, you know, it feels terrible to be building like any evade and copy or a face shield. So it's just like, all right, let's get this out the stage. Chivalrous we talked about. It was very good for Destroyer flip, hate, and then of course the flip both players draw a card. Encouraging Training Partner was a reset that I think that everybody ran at least 1 or 2 of on its symbols.
This card was huge just because it was an offensive or a defensive card, right? Because if your opponent played enough speed hate characters like, Eraserheads, I had an enhanced speed way to change it back to 4, and then I could still play cards like Summon Dark Shadow to increase their speed even more, right? Although it's only 1, it was a way that I could my opponent. I'm going to make things fast regardless, or I'm going to start committing your board. You have to make a decision if you're going to use a speed hate card. And if you do, I have this kind of on-flip demand answer. But more often than not, I was using this off on defense. Just because if I set it back to 4, it's a lot easier to pull off a +2 breaker mid-block on an Ice Storm.
Yeah, one of my favorite one-ofs to run in any deck that I had was Frozen. Just an enhance on your turn, you destroy a foundation, your rival commits 1. Again, we're talking about another one of those destroy costs just to get value if you had committed foundations. Again, you had the speed pump, but if you didn't, Frozen was always nice to have to kind of create that we call it, stun is fake speed, so we generally like to call it in our game here. And I always felt bad to have 2 of them because you don't want to obviously be blowing up your stage all the time. But I don't know, it was always very good as a one-of.
Yeah, this card was really good. I'll be honest, I kind of wish maybe I was playing more of them at the time. I think there just wasn't a lot of people playing around board committal. So, like, the Giant Ice Walls, the Indiscriminates were very much, like, real game plans to kill people when you didn't draw the Dark Shadow Ruins. And again, most people in this deck were holding the high blocks for the Dark Shadow Ruins, and everything I just said was a low, right? Like Giant Ice Wall, Indiscriminate, like Ice Storm, even all those are low attacks, and the Frozens to help make those get through, and also Indiscriminates to do more damage. I kind of wish I played more, but I mean, yeah, just like you said, this versus Feeling Cute, they were there to do the same job, right?
Yeah, I joked when rotation happened and people were talking about, hey, Walt the dog needs to get hit. They're just kind of throwing it around. I was just like, no. I was like, Indiscriminate Shock rotated and y'all got comfortable without holding low blocks in your hand now.
Yeah.
One of the best defensive pieces, I understand why, but I hate that in Ordinance of Power, they're like 1 in a symbol and then the infinity. And that's probably because of this card here. Irrefutable Force of Nature. Enhance, commit, seal an earth, fire, or water asset or foundation. And then it has remove, seal any asset or foundation. What an incredible card.
Yeah, this card was again just like This card won me so many games, I think, just like by itself, which is why there's a fourth one in the sideboard, and I think I brought it in almost every game. So, uh, it was a low block foundation. You didn't care if you held on to one of them because you really only needed one in your stage for it to get its value off. This, in conjunction with Crow and Frog, like I said, Crow and Frog could ready anything in your stage that hadn't been readied. That includes this. And although it was selective on what symbols of cards you could pick, again, Kirishima 2 was everywhere in this format. And two of these symbols on here were Kirishima 2 symbols.
Yep.
So if you were playing against an Earth or maybe a Fire Kirishima, you just got to control their board. You got to press a stun button, and whatever they kept up, you got to seal the remaining ones. And then if you were playing against not those characters, because of how our back here, right? All of our cards had three symbols back here in this day. This wasn't the world of Attune where they only had one sometimes. Sometimes the cards they were playing just randomly had one of these three symbols, and you got to still pick it as a good choice. It was great in the mirror match because a lot of these cards have fire. It was great in the Kirishima read, and it just all around was a good one, and it got to seal. Because also sealed assets, which there weren't any crazy assets during this time. We didn't have no Cape of No Returns to worry about, or for vertical maneuvering equipments, but like it did have that option. You could do that thing. But at the end of the day, this was like the best thing I had to interact with my opponent's stage.
Yeah, no, this was like, and I was going to say too, this is also somewhat of my best defense against Tokoyami, shutting off the Stronger in Darkness. Just to have those few bit of vitality or health left to kind of finally, just have enough just to swing back on. Because that's all you hoped for. You hoped to live through a Tokoyami kill turn that was supposed to kill you, and then you draw the nuts next turn. And then go from there. League interview. This has always been a card on the love-hate fence. Is you either ran like a 1-of or a 3-of.
I was convinced to play this card as a 1-of because I had a 6-check. And my one funny story here is, I kid you not, I'm in this was top 8. Yeah, I was in top 8. I was playing against Travis Tangeman, who is a known player of our game. And I went first because I was the higher seed. And I went, I don't remember what they were, but I went foundation. I played 6 foundations because the 6th one was a 0 diff. And I had one more card in my hand, and I went, this 0 diff is on a 7. Or sorry, no, wait. No, I had 6 cards in my card. I said the 0 diff's on a 6. I have 0 cards. I have 7 cards in my hand because I'm a 7-hander going first. I'm like, I verbally out loud said to Travis, I play 6 checks. I put the 0 diff in my card pool, and I checked the only copy of League Interview in my deck, and I built 7 on Travis Tangeman on turn 1. And he's like, wow, dude, that was crazy. And I didn't say a word for the rest of the game, telling him that was the only 6 check I played in my deck. So I'm telling you is 6 checks are really cool. But yeah, it also just sometimes said first form mill 2, your Crow and Frog is actually a 4 diff, and it's going to ready a card for you. So yeah, it was pretty good.
Yeah. The information war is huge when it comes to playing the game sometimes there. This card is, of course, got banned, but one with nature. First, I want to read this card for everybody who didn't get a chance to play this card. Enhance, discard a card. Your rival's block mod to block this attack gets +2. Response, once per enhanced step, after you discard any number of cards, your attack gets +1 damage. And this foundation did not have unique on it.
Yeah, I mean, so this card, for everyone also, this card existed when I was playing the game. This card came out as a Woodman card in the Capcom Platinum series back in the year of, I don't know, 2018 or something like that. And when this card was played, and when this card existed back in the old days, nobody played it. Discarding a card from your hand was a kind of a hefty cost back then. We didn't have as much draw like we did now.
Mm-hmm.
And so like this card didn't really see play, except for one aggressive 7-hander that drew some cards. And his name is Tim Keefe 2. So Tim Keefe's champion card, who had the Chaos and Earth symbol, got to play this card, and they played cards that did draw cards. And it really helped push through that extra stuff because the character himself didn't give stats. When this got reprinted and it existed in our game, multiple people played this card. One, it was a different era, right?
Yeah.
Things like speed, and this is fake speed, right? Giving plus to your opponent's block.
Yeah.
And the fact that it wasn't unique, like you said, it said that even if you built 2 of these on a turn and you went into your kill string, when you go to play your 4th attack, if you just discarded 2 cards from your hand because you had 2 of these in your stage, your attack was essentially unblockable, right? This was a great meta read because of cards also in my sideboard. We had a card called Plus Ultra, which says if you try to block with it, it sets the speed to 0, but it had a +5 mid block on it. So the point was that you always blocked with Plus Ultra on a 5. Cards like One with Nature said you're not allowed to block with that card when you're tapped out. Like, you're just not allowed to block with that card because it was actually a 7 block mod, and you can't check 7s in our game. So at the end of the day, this card did get banned, but it wasn't as strong in this deck as people said or think it was. But it is oppressive, right? I was already playing a 7-hander, just kidding, an 8-hander because of Summon Dark Shadow. I was playing cards like Frigid Heatwave that drew me cards. It said my Chivalrous competitors said draw a card, and by drawing a card, it essentially just said I'm going to make this attack unblockable because I'm just going to discard that card so that the card that you drew doesn't matter. So like that's kind of the world that it existed in. And then also, depending on how many of these you had, as soon as you discarded a card from your hand, you got a ton of damage. Like, you just got a ton of it.
Yeah.
It was only a 3 of in my deck, because you really only needed 1 or 2 of these to win. Genuinely, you just needed 1 because of all the other focus that I had in the deck, but the card was just too good not to play.
Yeah, it's one of those, like, I've learned in our game here, if you want to see it, you run at least 3 copies. I never felt bad about One with Nature playing against Chaos decks. It was the Earth that is the issue. This combined with Snack Time just made it absolute nightmare.
Sometimes and I wasn't playing Snack Time just because of, like, you didn't need both, right? Maybe there was, and obviously I wasn't playing Earth, so I couldn't play Snack Time on Chaos. But the idea was, like, having that double conjunction. Snack Time was also a deadlock threat, right? That also fed itself, but like it was just also drawing cards. So it was just, there was this world where it existed in the past. I totally get how like design was probably like, hey, let's give it a shot. It wasn't that impactful before, but man, when it came back out in this era of the game, it was really, really strong. And I don't think, at least for a long time, we will see an effect like this for quite a while.
Yeah, because I was going to say, the only way that you can regularly manipulate people's block mods is Double Spirit Blast. And I try to run that card every time, every symbol that I can. That's funny.
And it's only 1, and it's an attack card.
Yeah.
And yes, you can echo it to do it again, but it is like... Yeah, like, I mean, you had to play a 5-diff on a 5-diff and have a momentum, and your opponent had to not interact with you, right?
Yeah.
So it's just like...
Yeah, no, it's great in Ymir. If you guys aren't playing in Ymir, add it in your Ymir list. Yeah, so it's funny, cause One with Nature, that happened at the same deal in the past, because I've also been told by the UFS vets that, like, Mop Strike just wasn't really played when it first came out in the first Yu Yu Hakusho set. And then eventually, in our new era, it just absolutely had to be put away.
Yeah, it was. It's definitely a different time, right? Because I think the biggest thing about Mob Strike was that we didn't have characters like Younger Toguro that were putting so much damage onto stuff. So it became this kind of like really oppressive piece where it wasn't just a double draw card. It was also just doming you for a third of your life total, which that's the part that doesn't feel good, right? Is that your opponent can play a bunch of these utility attacks, and they're also all for like lethal,
yeah.
and like that's the problem. And I think the almost same idea here is with this, like with One with Nature. At any point, I can turn an attack into something because of what my character was doing, a lethal move that was also incredibly difficult for you to block with. Yeah. And block modifications, there's not a lot of counters to that, right? Like we can sit here and go back and forth on speed. But if I never press a single speed button, block modifiers are one of those things that you don't get to like really, really interact with. Or there's not like ways to cancel it, there's not a lot of things that interact with that side of the metric in our game. And so it just became just a little too much is really where I was at.
Yeah. And then the last foundation of the deck was Petty Squabble. I always like this as a nice tech piece. It's just a funny card to commit your character. Both players discard two and draw two. But I will say that under the void symbol, I did use the response quite a bit. Well, was that used here in this deck too?
I actually used it more so for the response than I did the enhance.
Nice.
The perk was that the thing about this card is like you probably shouldn't have this in your deck if you can't use both modes of it.
Mm-hmm.
And the good news is that I could, right? Because my character doesn't care about being committed. The coolest thing about this card is that if you have 0 cards in your hand, as long as your character's ready, you can commit your character, and it's just straight draw 2 because it's not a cost on that. The cost is committing your character, not the discarding the cards.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a cool way to like your opponent like held on to these really important cards, and you like, nope, go get rid of them. Here's some 2 new ones. Like that won me some games. But yes, I used the response more often than you think because it was another way of getting selective board committal out of your opponent. And cards like Release, they were in my deck, were in other people's decks too.
Yeah.
And it is a repeatable piece that you have on your board that is constant defense. You remember we also had the Asui 3 diff at this time. I can't remember what it was called.
Was it Rescue Completed? No.
Rescue Completed. No, that's correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Committed Foundation. This attack gets -2 speed, so you just got to constantly have to do that. And at least this card said I had an answer to those, without having to use an irrefutable force of nature. So I did use the response more often than you think. And the cool part was, if you had any 1/1 natures on the board, when you went to use that response, you got some damage because you discarded a card.
Yeah. Yeah, good stuff, good stuff. I always like when I can get, again, we talk about value. Like, one, I like to have every card in my deck to, like, have its job. But then if it also gets to have a secondary job, that's just, like, sweet icing on the cake.
The last little interaction with this one, which was used more than once when I played it, the other coolest thing was that because we were playing cards like Crow and Frog Takedown, was that you could play a Crow and Frog, use Petty Squabble, commit your character, discard 2, draw 2, just to filter draw and try and find attacks, and then use Crow and Frog to ready your character, play a second attack, and you can use Petty Squabble again. So, on my turn, if I had a Crow and Frog, I could discard 4, draw 4. I could filter 4 cards, which is really good in our game just for finding what you need to find to kill somebody. So
yeah, I was gonna say
it was a good interaction.
Cycling is an evergreen good thing in our game.
Yeah.
Real quick, most of your sideboard is just stuff that's already in the main board, and I actually kind of want to talk about that a little bit. That is something that I noticed against with a lot of the veterans from the UFS era. Most of their sideboard, it's only like the second or third copy of a card that they're already running in the main board. Because I do notice like Probert, Tim Keefe, a lot of those guys, they are running like one-ofs in the main deck, and then they'll have the other ones there. Like, what's the benefit or the mindset behind? Was that just kind of a like access to card pool kind of thing, or is there really like a competitive strategy with just having extra copies of cards that are in your main board into the sideboard?
Yeah, for sure. So I'll be honest, I'm really just not a big one-of kind of person. As you can see, like my only one-of is Frozen, and as I said, and League of Interview.
Yeah.
League of Interview is an exception because it was a 6-check.
Yeah.
But Frozen, I even said I kind of wish I was playing more of it because like when it's just a one-of, when you sit here and you play the game, it just feels like, oh yeah, I got a little lucky and I drew my one-of, right? Mm-hmm. But the idea of playing extra copies in your sideboard say that you can always fudge those numbers or fudge the odds of getting the ones that you really want to see, right? So in some matchups, my opponent was heavy speed control. Encouraging Training Partner was really important. So me cutting even one of the copies of Irrefutable for instead another copy of Encouraging, I still get to play Irrefutable in my deck because I was playing enough copies, but I want to find this 3 of instead of the other 3 of. Vice versa. Here's another Irrefutable, but maybe I don't need the Frozen in this matchup, like at all. So I cut it and I get rid of it. Release. Maybe I need more defensive Zero Diffs and not these aggressive ones, so I'll cut one of them. I'll cut an Easily Excited and I'll put the Release in, right? So the idea is just like, you always should leave yourself open to the idea of playing these answers or playing specific pieces in your main board. Whether they're 1-ofs or 2-ofs or 3-ofs, it doesn't matter. But if they're very impactful cards in specific matchups, or matchups you are struggling with, there should be probably room for extra versions of them in your sideboard because they don't affect your main board numbers.
Yeah,
that's just kind of the biggest part about it.
Yeah, that's a good discussion there. I only adopted it because, like I said, I seen the UFS veterans doing it, but now I'm glad I know that I have like the know-how behind there, because like I said, a lot of times early on learning the game, you net deck and you see things, you're just like, well, why is that? Well, I'm going to do it anyway. Hey, it's working. I don't know why it works, but I'm going to keep doing it. So yeah, it's definitely insightful for that there, because that's kind of how I model my sideboard now too. Like I have throw hate. I mean, nobody really plays throws, so I kind of keep all my copies of my throw hate in the sideboard, and then the rest of my sideboard I try to make like 1-ofs or 2-ofs, unless it's something like a runaway. Then I maybe run like 2 copies of that just in case. Now I may even contemplate main boarding just because of like Midoriya 6 with the Midoriya on the move with the one-hit KOs, or just these attacks that are just getting like super big or super fast. Or I'm sorry, super fast or super big on damage. And it's just like, you're getting to the point where if you don't have the stat resets, or they're playing enough that you can blow through your stat resets, it's just one of those things I can bring in for this specific matchup. I don't want to completely have all the answers for Smiling Titan in my main board, and I only play 2 Smiling Titans, then I'm be upset.
So, yeah, and I think the other thing too is like, just like my last little note about why I do it this way is like a lot of the cards in my sideboard that are those 1 extra copies are those defensive foundations or those technical ones, and a lot of the times is like, you want more copies of those specific cards when you are going second, right? Your opponent's going to be the first person that can attack you. You want to find those pieces on turn 1 a little quicker, so you need to probably play a few extra copies of them. But the idea is that going first, you want the deck to be a little more tailored about going first, right?
Yeah.
You need to be able to break serve, but that's what games 2 and 3 are for. That's what games 2 and 3 are meant to be for, because if you can win going first, as your deck was structured to do, you can side out those aggressive pieces so that you get to survive and just backswing your opponent. Because backswinging is very important in our game, and so a lot of these pieces are kind of for when I would go second. You take out some of the aggressive ones.
Yeah. No, good stuff. Like I said, if you guys are like just getting into the game, or maybe kind of like I've been top 64, top 32, trying to find like break that top cut. Definitely something that's insightful. I feel like we laugh because sometimes these champions come back. Yeah, I didn't even play my sideboard, but it's important that it was there, and then they can explain what happened.
Yeah, and I would say about our game, that is one of the hardest things to do in our game, is being like a master at the sideboard. I can't tell you how many people actually are, because it's such a hard skill to acquire. And in our game, the biggest part about sideboarding is like, even if you put the cards in your sideboard, how many times have you put something in your sideboard and in the actual thick of the event, you like second guess yourself and you don't ever actually use the card? And that happens a ton in our game. Some people even will have full plans ready to go. Like, this is in the sideboard for this matchup, but then you sit across the table from that player and they're using it a certain different way, or they have an answer to your answer and you don't feel confident to change how your deck was structured to begin with, and people don't pull the trigger and they don't put the card in their side, or they don't put it in their main board from the sideboard, and it just never gets used. And that happens a lot.
I was going to say, yeah, it's happened to me enough to the point that I've been burned by it that now I stick to my guns. If I'm like, this is specific for this matchup, when I see it, I play it. If I notice that, hey, they're playing this particular setup, then I'm signing in, because I've also run into the issue of when I'm in that game 2 or that game 3, I pull the card that I would have sided out, and I'm like, I really wish this was in my sideboard right now, and I had the card that's supposed to be in my hand. So that was the national champ deck. I gave you a little bit of homework assignment. I did the same thing with Tim. So Tam and Sean have partnered together. They do a retro week on his webcam Wednesdays, the last week of the month. I've enjoyed exploring retro myself, but I asked you to take this Tokoyami deck and see how we could adjust it for the current retro card pool, which, funnily enough, the original deck, the only thing that's you can't play in retro is Twisting Azure Inferno. So if you didn't want to update the card pool, you just replace the Twisting Azure and you can just run the deck as is. But be that as it may, we have gotten a lot of really good cards. And then I just want to quickly go over this. Walk the Dog is just because, I mean, it's Chaos Walk the Dog. Randall Spirit Gun, I love this as a spicy 1X.
Yeah, it's cool because you do have a once per turn on your character, and this is another one of those cards like Dark Shadow Ruin
Mm-hmm.
that does benefit when it receives a speed and damage bonus, which is what Summon Dark Shadow does. So I thought, let's put it in as a one of. It helps extend your chain a little bit more. It also has EX and powerful. It can't be that bad, right? Play 1/2 check. I mean, having played the deck in the past, like you can kind of survive without it, basically.
Yeah.
Or
And then the rest, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. The rest of the
no,
attack
you're
lineup
good.
is kind of as is, just changing numbers here or there, but pretty much everything is still the same.
Yeah, walk the dog just to kind of synergize again with that. I did find that committing your opponent's cards in their stage was the better game plan for this deck, and this one draws cards, right? So it just kind of gives you this extra push that you're kind of looking for. And obviously, we cut the frozen slashes and the twisting edges, like you said. But
Yeah.
this is also, remember that deck was a 59 card deck, and that's not allowed. So
Yeah.
we did also increase the count of the deck by one. So we are now at 60 cards even. But it is still aggressively tailored.
Yeah, and then Stronger Darkness. Foundation lineup is still pretty much the same, except now we have Rescue Specialist. I'm not surprised to see that one there. Again, Tokoyami has speed problems. Rescue Specialist just says, hey, you get your +1/+1 when he's turned sideways. Fast Friendship, probably best flip speed hate in the game. Capture the Target is interesting. I do like this one, though.
It's an aggressive extender. Use some of your AOT cards you got, right? It's one of the better, like, offensively tailored foundations. It's got a low block. It's a one diff. It just readies itself once you've played your third attack for the turn, right? So it just still feels good. Like,
Yeah. Encouraging trainer partner. I said all this the same. One with Nature is not banned in retro, so you guys are more than welcome to play this card there. Pastor Walls, there's your 1x6 check.
I want X6 check, but assets are really big in retro, so this one matters a lot more.
Yeah, and then you got 3x of exam strategy. I do like this one. It's just enhanced destroy attack gets +1/+1 for each attack in your card pool. It's just EX and powerful X in the stage, and then also has a nice deflect 2 from hand if need be as well too.
Yeah, I just tried to tailor a lot more of the newer cards that you don't have never really been able to play with this character. I'm not big on having to go all the way back. There's plenty of old cards that are really, really good. Mainly foundations that are some of the best foundations that have ever been printed on these symbols. But at the end of the day, I don't think you have to go digging back for all these cards. But if you already own these other ones from playing in the game right now, you just have to go grab the MHA1 stuff that you're missing.
Yeah, and MHA1 stuff is fairly cheap, and this is why I'm kind of glad that we did this. Like, I just want people just like, oh, I don't have old cards. As old cards is, I mean, retro is about just having the access to that, but you don't have to have old cards to run good decks in retro. As long as your deck is doing what you want it to do. So just if you're thinking about maybe wanting to dip your toes in that, like I said, Tokoyami is a ton of fun to play. This is definitely an affordable, outside of Walk the Dog, of course. These cards are not very expensive. Like I said, Frigid Heatwave used to be like a 25, anywhere up to like $40 card, I think, at one point in time, and now it's like $6, $7 maybe. Everything that's out of rotation is now relatively cheaper. So I don't even know what Chronofall last I had seen was like cents, but I know I have like 10 copies of that card.
The other good news is you're playing a character that has 2 Attack on Titan symbols. So Attack on Titan 2 is coming out, pre-releases this weekend at time of recording. So you'll have access to those that you could also put into this deck. And the cool thing, because it's the retro format, come next year in March, when all of these set 2 and set 3 cards rotate, you will already have them. And I just genuinely don't think you change this deck very much, right? Like, I mean,
No,
so,
it doesn't. It does what it needs to do. And like I said, just for Walk the Dog, guys, if Chaos has like a ton of solid kill cards, you can just season it as is, whichever one that you may not have, but everything else is good on there. So
absolutely. Everything we talked about, I think, earlier as well, like, you can just increase the count on the ice storms. You can maybe play more copies of Giant Ice Wall. I did cut one in this version. So like all of these cards you can still play. You just want to make sure you have a nice curve, and this does count as one of the quote-unquote 4 diffs in the deck.
yeah.
So as long as you have the Ice Storms, the Crow and Frogs, and an amount of 4 diffs, the deck does flow pretty well, and you're already giving plus to your checks, so it's pretty easy to get there.
Yeah. Well, Barrett, I appreciate you coming on. Like I said, I've enjoyed. This was like the first I got to witness this one in person, so it wasn't like a lot of, with Tim we were talking about like diversity cuts and stuff. I had not heard of like any of that thing right there, and PTCs and stuff like that. So we had a bit of a more history dive. This one here, like I said, even though it was only 2 years ago, it's kind of hard to dig up stuff, but I do remember the terror of Tokoyami. Yeah, no, I'm just happy to have this, guys. If you want to, again, Tam hosts the last week of every month is a Retro Wednesday. This is definitely a deck you can certainly pick up and just have a ton of fun with. You can certainly try it out, kind of figure out he is a 20 health, 7 hand size character. So as long as you just get those, play just enough defense, you can almost kind of like accidentally find a kill turn depending on what you draw. So that's, I think, so that'll do it. Again, Barrett, I appreciate you. Any other final words you want to say for people?
No, this was a blast. I had a great time. Maybe I'll even be back another time when we can talk about my 2018 Nationals win. So you never know. Maybe I'll be back and we can do a little bit more history walk down memory lane for me at least. But no, this was a blast. Thanks so much for having me, man. And if anyone's interested in the bird, you can find me on Discord. I'm usually at Nero Kanza, Nerokanza. I also work for UVS Games, so you can always just find a way to get a hold of me and contact me. And I love this game. I've been playing it for years, and you can't ever convince me that there wasn't any time that I've had fun playing this game, and this is one of those examples.
Yeah, so also you play a weekly top 8 with Tam on his show.
Yeah, you can find me on Tamer Cardwell's YouTube channel as well, where we go and replay all of the top 8 top cuts that happen at all of our competitive events across the years. And I don't think we're going to stop doing that anytime soon, so you can for sure see me there.
Nice. If you can find me that 2018 deck list, I will bring you back.
I was wondering about that. I think I could probably find it. I'd have to do some digging, but yeah, I could probably figure it out.
Yeah, that's fine. I know Tim Keefe told me he think that he had an old copy in TTS of his Spike deck, and he's just like, if he does, then he can recreate that, and we'll do that again. So yeah, that's primarily been the big things, guys. If you want a national or a Worlds or HLC, whatever iteration through time that was, again, I would love to have you guys on. I love enjoying going back through the history of this game, kind of seeing the type of cards, type of play styles. I will say, since I've started playing Retro, my deck building has gotten insanely better. And then like kind of the outside of the box thinking is what Retro has opened up my mind for as well too, for like some of the cards to play. Like Kevin Broberg with Aaron's Trial. Not too many people. You can say what you want. I guarantee you, not a ton of the people were playing think about running Aaron's Trial and just like a Death Casino deck. There's just, but like Retro kind of opens up, and of course he's another UFS veteran era as well too. But like I've always found that you guys have like some of the most interesting deck buildings. Sometimes you just look at the deck list and just like, how does this work? Like, this deck looks like it sucks, and then you just go and freaking top cut and win whatever with it. So, but yeah, again, just reach out to me. I am Mammalian in Discord, on YouTube, and on Twitch as well. So I'm usually active in most of the big UVS Discord channels. But yeah, like I said, if you got those, and if we can find the deck list, I would definitely love to come and do an episode with you guys. So that will wrap this up for the evening. You guys have a great time. I hope to see you playing some Retro now that you realize that one, it's affordable, and two, you don't have to have all the old style or old era cards just to kind of get your feet wet and decide if that's something you want to dig into. That being said, I will see you all hopefully at the table next time. Bye-bye.